The night was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Katelyn had been working her food delivery job for over a year now, and while it wasn't glamorous, it paid the bills. She didn't mind the late-night shifts. In fact, she preferred them. The streets were emptier, the orders were fewer, and the tips were sometimes surprisingly generous. But tonight, something felt off. The air was heavy, and the faint hum of the city seemed distant, almost muffled. Her phone buzzed in her hand, breaking the silence. It was another delivery request. She glanced at the screen and frowned. The address was on the outskirts of the city, a place she rarely ventured to, especially at this hour. She was about to decline when her eyes caught the note attached to the order. "We'll tip $100 for delivery. Please come quickly." $100? That was more than she made in an entire night. Her hesitation wavered. It was just one delivery, and the money would cover her rent for the week. She accepted the order, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped the screen. The GPS led her out of the city, the streetlights growing sparse as the buildings thinned out. The road twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. She checked her phone again, making sure she hadn't taken a wrong turn. The address was correct, but there was no sign of civilization. Just as she was about to turn back, the headlights of her car illuminated a pair of wrought iron gates. They were massive, adorned with intricate designs that seemed to twist and writhe in the dim light. Beyond the gates, a long driveway stretched into the darkness, lined with towering trees that seemed to close in on her as she drove forward. The mansion came into view slowly, its silhouette emerging from the shadows like a beast waking from slumber. It was enormous, with towering spires and windows that reflected the moonlight like cold, unblinking eyes. Katelyn parked her car near the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. The place was eerily silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. She grabbed the food bag and stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel. As she approached the door, two figures emerged from the shadows. They were dressed in expensive black coats and gloves, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses despite the late hour. They didn't say a word, simply gestured for her to enter the mansion. Katelyn hesitated. "I can just leave the food here," she said, her voice trembling. One of the guards shook his head. "We're not allowed to receive it. You'll have to take it inside." Reluctantly, she stepped through the doors, the heavy wood creaking as it closed behind her. The interior of the mansion was even more opulent than she had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light refracting off the polished marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of incense, a cloying sweetness that made her stomach churn. She was about to call out when an elderly woman appeared at the top of a grand staircase. She was strikingly beautiful, her silver hair cascading down her shoulders like a waterfall. Her eyes, however, were cold and calculating, and they locked onto Katelyn with an intensity that made her shiver. "Thank you for coming, dear," the woman said, her voice smooth and melodic. "You must be exhausted from the drive. Why don't you come in and rest for a while?" Katelyn shook her head, clutching the food bag tightly. "I really can't. My husband is waiting for me at home." The woman's smile didn't waver. "Nonsense. It's late, and you've come all this way. Just a few minutes to catch your breath." Her tone was gentle but insistent, and before Katelyn could protest further, the woman was descending the stairs, her hand extended as if to guide her. Against her better judgment, Katelyn followed. The woman led her through a series of ornate hallways, each more lavish than the last. But as they turned a corner, Katelyn froze. The room before her was filled with people, all wearing black hoods and masks that obscured their faces. Candles lined the walls, their flickering light casting grotesque shadows on the faces of the figures. In the center of the room was a large circular table adorned with strange symbols and what looked like dried blood. Katelyn's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a dinner party. This was something far more sinister. The woman's hand tightened around her arm, her nails digging into Katelyn's skin. "Welcome, my dear," she said, her voice now dripping with malice. "We've been waiting for you." Katelyn tried to pull away, but the woman's grip was like iron. The masked figures began to chant, their voices low and guttural, rising in volume until they filled the room. Katelyn's heart raced as she realized the truth. She wasn't here to deliver food. She was the offering. The woman leaned in close, her breath hot against Katelyn's ear. "You're going to play a little game with us," she whispered. "Hide and seek. If you can escape before we find you, you're free to go. But if we catch you—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Katelyn's mind raced. She had to get out of here. Now. The woman released her arm, and Katelyn didn't hesitate. She bolted, her feet slamming against the marble floor as she sprinted down the hallway. Behind her, she could hear the sound of footsteps, the chanting growing louder as the masked figures gave chase. She turned a corner, her lungs burning as she pushed herself to run faster. The mansion was a labyrinth, its hallways twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. She could hear them getting closer, their laughter echoing off the walls. She ducked into a room, slamming the door shut behind her. It was a study, filled with bookshelves and a large desk. She crouched behind the desk, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The door creaked open, and she held her breath, praying they wouldn't find her. Footsteps entered the room, slow and deliberate. She could see their shadows moving across the floor, their masked faces scanning the room. One of them stopped in front of the desk, their head tilting as if they could sense her presence. Katelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the desk. The figure leaned down, their mask inches from her face. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But then the sound of a door slamming shut echoed through the mansion, and the figure straightened up, turning to leave the room. Katelyn waited until the footsteps faded before she dared to move. She crept out from behind the desk, her legs shaking as she made her way to the door. She peered out into the hallway, her eyes darting back and forth. The coast was clear, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. She had to find a way out. She moved quickly, her footsteps light as she navigated the maze-like halls. Every creak, every whisper of wind made her jump, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. She turned a corner and froze. At the end of the hallway was a door slightly ajar with moonlight streaming through the crack. It was her chance. She sprinted towards it, her heart pounding in her ears. But just as she reached the door, a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back. She screamed, thrashing against the grip, but it was no use. The masked figure pulled her close, their breath hot against her face. "You're not going anywhere," they hissed. Katelyn's mind raced. She had to think fast. With all her strength, she kicked out, her foot connecting with the figure's knee. They stumbled, their grip loosening just enough for her to break free. She didn't look back, didn't stop to see if they were following. She burst through the door, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She was outside, but she wasn't safe yet. The mansion loomed behind her, its windows glowing with an unnatural light. She could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, the chanting growing louder as the figures emerged from the house. She ran, her feet slipping on the wet grass as she made her way towards the gates. They were still open, but she could see the guards moving to close them. She had to make it. She had to. Her lungs burned, her legs aching as she pushed herself to run faster. The gates were closing, the gap narrowing with every second. She dove through the opening just as the gates slammed shut behind her. She didn't stop, didn't look back. She ran to her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and she sped down the driveway, the mansion disappearing in her rearview mirror. But even as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching her, their eyes following her every move. She didn't stop until she was back in the city, the bright lights and familiar streets a welcome relief. But as she pulled into her driveway, she noticed something on the passenger seat, a black hood, identical to the ones worn by the masked figures, and pinned to it was a note, "We'll see you soon." Katelyn's blood ran cold. She sat in her car, her hands trembling as she stared at the black hood on the passenger seat. She couldn't tell her husband. He'd never believe her, and she didn't want to drag him into whatever nightmare she'd stumbled into. Taking a deep breath, she stuffed the hood into her bag, wiped her face, and forced herself to act normal. When she walked inside, her husband greeted her with a smile, completely unaware of the terror she'd just endured. She told him it had been a long night, and he didn't ask questions. Over the next few days, she tried to move on, but every shadow, every sound, made her heart race. She quit her food delivery job without explanation, never daring to venture out late at night again. She never spoke of what happened, burying the memory deep down. But no matter how hard she tried to forget, the fear stayed with her, a constant reminder that some horrors never truly let you go. If you enjoyed Katelyn's terrifying story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that will keep you on edge. And remember, the real monsters aren't the ones in stories. They're the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Stay cautious, stay aware, and trust your instincts, because danger doesn't always come with a warning. Until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant.